The chandeliers sparkled as the bride entered. Then the master of ceremonies smiled. Now we'd like to ask the groom's father, Alan Graves, to say a few words. The applause was thunderous. My son grinned. My real father died when I was young. Alan raised me. Cameras flashed. Guests applauded. But I was still here. Alive. Sitting in the second row, I stood silently. Before we dive into how it came to this, if you believe karma always finds its way, hit subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. The chandeliers shimmered like stars captured in crystal. The air carried the hum of whispered greetings, soft laughter, and the smooth notes of a string quartet warming the hall. I sat in the second row, my tie pulled snug, my shoulders straight, heart steady but full. At 71, I thought I had seen every season of life, yet this moment, my son's wedding, felt like the peak of my years. Edward Sullivan, retired banker, devoted father. That's all I was and all I needed to be. For decades I had worked through the bone-tired nights, sacrificing vacations, ignoring my own wants, keeping my focus sharp on one mission, Jason. My only child, my pride, my bloodline. I thought of the first time I carried him, how small he was in my arms. I remembered his wide-eyed look when I handed him the keys to his first car, the way he leaned into me after late-night study sessions, exhausted but determined. I remembered him standing in a cheap college dorm, his eyes burning with ambition, promising, "Dad, I'll make you proud." That promise was what brought me here tonight, dressed in my best suit, waiting to hear my name spoken, waiting to rise as the man who had built every step beneath him. The guests stood, necks craning, as the bride entered, white gown trailing, face glowing, the music swelling like thunder wrapped in silk. Cameras flashed, capturing every angle. I felt my chest swell, ready for the moment every father dreams of. Then, the microphone cracked alive. The master of ceremonies smiled brightly. "Now," he said, voice ringing through the room, "we'd like to ask the groom's father, Alan Graves, to say a few words." Alan Graves. Not Edward Sullivan. The name dropped like ice water down my spine. My jaw tightened, my heart staggered. I blinked, waiting for correction, waiting for Jason to speak up, to fix the insult. Instead, my son turned, broad grin stretching across his face, pride lighting his eyes not toward me, but toward Alan. "My real father died when I was young," Jason declared, "but Alan raised me to be the man I am today." Thunderous applause erupted. Guests clapped until the air shook. Cameras swung, lenses zooming in. Alan stood, basking in borrowed glory. I sat still, breathing, alive. In the second row, erased. And in that instant, my vision sharpened. The years of sacrifice, the checks written, the debts carried, they weren't forgotten. Not by me. I rose slowly to my feet, silent, not yet speaking, not yet striking. But the room had no idea that the man they buried alive was standing right before them. Jason wasn't always distant. There was a time when my son looked at me as if I carried the whole world in my hands. I can still see his small fingers clutching mine on the first day of school, his nervous eyes searching for reassurance. "Don't let go, Dad," he whispered, and I never did, not once. Through scraped knees, science projects, and teenage heartbreaks, I was there, the steady hand, the reliable voice. I worked long hours at the bank, and when promotions came, I took them not for pride but for him, for the tuition fees, for the roof over our heads, for the promise of something better. Every number I punched into a calculator was for Jason's future. When he was 16, his dream was a car. Not a flashy one, just something that could take him from school to his part-time job. I remember handing him the keys. His face lit up with a joy I thought would last forever. "You're the best, Dad," he said, hugging me so hard I could feel his ribs press against mine. That moment became a memory I held on to when everything later turned cold. But even then, there were signs. Jason had a fire in him, a hunger for more than what I could give. He envied kids with wealthy families, kids who seemed to float on privilege while he watched me calculate every expense. I told him again and again, hard work builds character, sacrifice builds strength. He nodded, but I could see the flicker in his eyes. He didn't want to struggle, he wanted shortcuts. By the time he reached college, the weight of my sacrifices grew heavier. His tuition didn't pay itself. I mortgaged the house, convinced myself it was an investment in my son's future. I tightened my belt, skipped vacations, ignored the retirement brochures piling up in my drawer. Jason promised he'd pay it all back someday, with interest. I believed him. How could I not? He was my son. Then came the late-night calls when his classes overwhelmed him. I drove across town to sit with him, brewing coffee while he ranted about professors who didn't see his genius. I reminded him that genius means nothing without grit. He would sigh, complain, then eventually fall asleep at the desk, while I covered him with a blanket. He was still my boy, restless, stubborn, but mine. I had no idea those same restless ambitions would one day erase me, that the son who once begged me not to let go would be the man who, in front of hundreds, declared me dead. Alan Graves entered our lives like a storm dressed in a tailored suit. He wasn't family. He wasn't even a longtime friend. He was a business partner Jason met during his senior year of college, a man with silver hair, polished shoes, and the kind of confidence that filled every room. I remember the first dinner we shared. Alan spoke loudly, laughed even louder, and carried himself like a man who had already won. Jason looked at him with something I hadn't seen before, reverence. I tried to welcome him. After all, my son needed guidance in the business world, and if Alan could offer it, I was willing to listen. But from the beginning, Alan's eyes lingered on me with a certain judgment, a smirk that said, "You're obsolete." At the table, Jason introduced me politely as Dad, but then followed quickly with, "Alan's like a second father to me." I let it slide, telling myself it was just flattery. But over the months, the words began to shift. At events, Jason leaned on Alan's shoulder, laughing at his jokes, calling him Pops. The first time I heard it, I felt something twist in my chest. Pops, a word I had earned through decades of sacrifice, suddenly handed to a man who had known Jason for less than 2 years. Alan fed Jason's hunger for shortcuts. Where I had preached patience, Alan promised speed. Where I had preached responsibility, Alan praised risk. Jason lapped it up, craving the validation I refused to give so easily. I became the voice of caution, while Alan became the voice of glory. One evening I overheard Alan tell Jason, "Your father means well, but he's from another time. Outdated. You need men who understand the new world." Jason didn't defend me. He didn't even hesitate. He nodded. The shift was slow but undeniable. Dinners that once included me now excluded me. Phone calls grew shorter. Holidays felt colder. My son, my only son, began orbiting closer to Alan's son and farther from mine. I told myself it was just business, that blood ties couldn't be broken by ambition. But deep down, I felt the first crack forming, a crack that would one day split wide open in the middle of a wedding hall. The years rolled forward, and with them, the distance grew. Jason's calls came less often, his words shorter, clipped, as though speaking to me was an obligation rather than a choice. The boy who once begged me to sit beside him at night now dismissed me with hurried excuses. "Busy, Dad. Can't talk right now." When his company launched, I was there in the back of the crowded hall, clapping until my palms ached. But he never introduced me to the investors, never told them that the seed money came from my mortgage and my retirement fund. Instead, Alan stood by his side, basking in the spotlight. "We built this together," Jason said to the crowd, his voice swelling with pride. Alan nodded like a king accepting his crown. I sat in silence, unseen, a ghost haunting my son's success. Friends noticed. Old colleagues asked me why Jason never mentioned me in interviews, why the press always highlighted Alan as the guiding force. I smiled politely, told them I was proud, that it didn't matter who got the credit. But late at night, when the house was too quiet, I stared at the photographs on the mantel, birthdays, graduations, milestones, and wondered how many of those memories Jason had already rewritten without me. Holidays became colder. Jason and Alan traveled together, posting pictures online, expensive suits, tropical resorts, champagne dinners. I saw them, though they never tagged me. My phone would buzz with texts from neighbors. "Isn't that your son? Who's the man he keeps calling Dad?" I never replied. What could I say? That my own son was replacing me in broad daylight. The final sting came at a business gala. I approached Jason, extending my hand, ready to congratulate him. He hesitated, looked past me, then introduced Alan as the man who shaped me into who I am. My title as father wasn't just fading, it was being erased, line by line, replaced by a man who had bought his way into my son's heart with promises of glory. I went home that night and sat in the dark. For the first time, I felt the weight of something breaking, not just the bond between father and son, but the belief that blood could withstand ambition. That was when I began to understand. Jason wasn't drifting. He was pushing me out, piece by piece, until there was nothing left to push. The wedding day should have been my redemption. Every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every dollar poured into Jason's future. I thought it would all come together in this one moment. I woke early, pressed my best suit, polished the shoes I had owned for years. The mirror reflected a man aged by sacrifice, but still proud, still hopeful. I told myself that no matter the distance between us, today Jason would honor his father. The hall glittered with wealth. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen waterfalls, while violins filled the air with soft triumph. Guests murmured about Jason's success, about Alan's mentorship. Their words floated around me like smoke. I clenched my hands, reminding myself that none of them knew the truth, that behind every shining surface stood the shadow of my labor. I sat in the second row, close enough to see Jason's eyes when the time came. The bride entered to a thunder of music and applause. My chest swelled. For a moment, I believed again. Believed he would remember. Believed he would call my name. Then the master of ceremonies lifted the microphone. Now, we'd like to invite the groom's father, Alan Graves, to give a few words. The words rang like a verdict. My breath stalled. I waited, certain Jason would correct it. But instead, my son smiled, turned to the crowd, and said, "My real father died when I was young, but Alan raised me to be the man I am today." The hall erupted with applause. Guests clapped until their palms stung. Cameras flashed. Alan stood tall, accepting the honor meant for me. And I sat frozen, alive but declared dead, erased by the very sun I had carried through life. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Some guests glanced at me with confusion, others with pity. My face burned, but I did not move. Not yet. My blood boiled, but my body stayed still, because I knew what no one else did, that the man they buried alive was not finished. I rose slowly, silently. No anger in my voice, no outburst to spoil the bride's day. Just a father standing to remind the world he still existed. They did not yet know that every check I had written, every contract I had signed, every transfer Jason had ever received was a debt that still carried my name. And debts always come due. Long before Alan Graves entered the picture, before the cameras and the betrayal, there was only me and the weight of responsibility that never seemed to lift. Jason had just been accepted into college, his eyes shining with dreams bigger than his small-town roots. He wanted to study technology, to innovate, to build a future that would change the world. I believed him. I wanted him to have every chance I never had. But the acceptance letter came with a cruel reminder: tuition costs that would bleed me dry. My savings weren't enough. Retirement brochures sat unopened in a drawer, mocking me. I should have been planning for peace, not another mountain of debt. Still, I couldn't let Jason down. So I walked into the bank where I had once been a respected employee, and I signed away the home I had spent decades paying for. A mortgage, a gamble, a father's silent promise. The day I told Jason, his face lit up brighter than any holiday I could remember. "You did this, for me?" he whispered, as if the thought had never crossed his mind. I smiled, hid the fear in my chest, and said, "Of course, that's what fathers do." Nights grew long after that. I worked late shifts as a consultant, crunching numbers for clients half my age, all while my own financial stability crumbled. I cut corners: new vacations, new dinners out, new clothes. My shoes wore thin, but I told myself it was worth it every time Jason called home, excited about a new project, a new idea, a new plan for success. There were times, though, when his tone carried expectation rather than gratitude. "Dad, I need more for the lab fees. Dad, the books cost extra." Each request chipped away at my savings, but I always found a way. I gave, and still, he wanted more. The neighbors praised me. "Edward, you're such a devoted father." They didn't see the bills piling up on my desk. They didn't see me skipping meals to stretch the money further. They didn't see me staring at the mortgage contract in the dead of night, wondering if I had just doomed myself to poverty. But when Jason walked across campus for the first time, shoulders straight, eyes bright, I felt the sacrifice lift, if only for a moment. I thought I was buying his future. I never imagined I was also purchasing my own erasure. When Jason turned 16, the world seemed to spin faster around him. He was restless, chasing independence like it was oxygen. Every conversation circled back to one thing: a car. Not a flashy sports model, just something reliable that could take him from school to work, from late-night study sessions to wherever his dreams were pulling him. He wanted freedom, and I wanted to give it to him. The problem was the cost. Even a used car was more than my monthly paycheck could stretch. I spent weeks comparing models, running numbers, calculating what I could sell, what bills I could push off. In the end, I drained what little I had tucked away in savings. I told myself it was worth it, that this was more than steel and wheels. It was belief, trust, a father's vote of confidence. The day I handed him the keys, Jason's eyes lit up like Christmas morning. "You're the best, Dad!" he shouted, hugging me so tight my ribs ached. Neighbors peeked out of their windows, smiling at the scene. For that moment, I felt rich. Richer than any banker, richer than any man could dream to be. But behind that joy was my quiet sacrifice. I skipped repairs on the house that year. The roof leaked when it rained, but I patched it with tar myself, rather than calling a professional. My own car sat with bald tires because I couldn't afford replacements. I walked to work more often, telling colleagues it was for exercise. The truth? I was giving Jason everything, even at the expense of my own safety and comfort. At first, Jason treated the car like a treasure. He washed it every weekend, bragged to his friends about how his dad had worked so hard to make it possible. But over time, the gratitude dulled. Requests grew. "Dad, I need gas money. Dad, can you cover the insurance this month?" Always "Dad, Dad, Dad," and I always found a way. One night, I heard him telling his friends, "Yeah, my car's nothing special. Just something I scraped together." His words cut deeper than any knife. Scraped together? I had bled for that car. I had given up my own comfort so he could drive toward his future. But I swallowed the hurt, because that's what fathers do. We sacrifice. We absorb. We keep going. I told myself he was young, that he didn't yet understand the cost of things. I believed that one day, when he looked back, he would remember. I didn't know then that forgetting me would become his greatest skill. College gave Jason ambition, but ambition alone doesn't pay for servers, software, or office space. By his junior year, he came home brimming with excitement about an app he and a few classmates wanted to launch. His words tumbled over each other. "This is it, Dad. The next big thing. We just need capital." Capital. That word weighed heavier than stone. I had already mortgaged the house for tuition, drained most of my savings for his expenses. But Jason's eyes burned with the same fire I once had when I dreamed of a better life for us. How could I deny him? So I made the hardest decision of my life. I cashed out my retirement fund, the nest egg I had spent decades building, the promise of a peaceful old age. With trembling hands, I signed the papers, turning my future into fuel for his. Jason hugged me so hard that day, I thought my ribs might break. "You won't regret this, Dad. I'll make us millionaires." Nah. At first, the house buzzed with his energy. Whiteboards full of scribbles, late-night brainstorming calls, prototypes spread across the dining table. I kept him fed, kept the lights on, stayed quiet when he paced the house at 3 a.m. I told myself this chaos was progress, that the sleepless nights would pay off. But startups are merciless. Within a year, the venture crumbled. Servers failed, investors pulled back, debts mounted. I watched Jason's confidence falter, saw the panic in his eyes. He came home one night, shoulders sagging, and whispered, "Dad, I don't know what to do." So I did what fathers do. I stepped in. I covered the debts, wrote checks I couldn't afford, and kept the collectors at bay. Jason promised he would try again, that failure was just the first step to success. I nodded, encouraged him, pretended I believed every word. Inside, though, fear gnawed at me. I was no longer just sacrificing luxuries, I was sacrificing survival. My retirement was gone, my future security was gone, all for a dream that existed only in my son's voice. And yet, when Jason looked at me with gratitude, even shame in his eyes, I told him it was all right. "Every great man stumbles, son. What matters is that you stand again." Ezer. What I didn't realize was that every time I saved him, I was also teaching him something dangerous. That no matter how badly he failed, his father would bleed quietly to clean the mess. That lesson would one day erase me completely. Failure leaves stains that no applause can wash away. When Jason's first startup collapsed, I thought the worst was behind us. But failure has a way of multiplying. Creditors began calling. bills arrived in thick envelopes stamped with red letters, "Delinquent, Final Notice." Jason tried to act unfazed, but I saw the shadows under his eyes, the nervous twitch in his hands. He was drowning, and as always, he turned to me. "Dad," he said one night, his voice low, almost ashamed, "I just need a little more time. Just a little more help." Help. I had already mortgaged the house, already cashed out my retirement. But what was I supposed to do? Watch him sink? Watch my only son collapse under the weight of his own ambition? Number. I did what fathers do. I pulled out my checkbook, even when the numbers screamed against it. I dipped into every reserve I had left, credit lines, personal loans, favors from old colleagues. I covered his debts, one by one, until my own accounts looked like hollow shells. Collectors stopped calling Jason because they started calling me. My name was on the contracts, my reputation on the line. He was free to chase another dream while I sat at the kitchen table night after night, calculating how to keep the lights on. Jason's gratitude came in bursts, quick hugs, rushed thank yous before he darted back to Alan or his next big idea. But it wasn't the same as before. He wasn't looking at me with awe anymore. He was looking at me with expectation, as though my sacrifice was a given, not a gift. One afternoon, I overheard him tell Alan on the phone, "My dad's got it covered. He always does." The words cut deep, sharper than any collector's notice. Got it covered, as if my sacrifice was a bottomless well, as if bleeding for him was just part of my nature. The truth? I was running on fumes. My hands shook when I wrote the last check. My chest tightened each time I answered the phone, dreading another demand. But I never told Jason. I couldn't bear the thought of him seeing me as weak, so I smiled, told him to keep trying, to keep building, even as I felt myself crumbling. Looking back, I wonder if he ever truly saw me in those days, or if, even then, I was already becoming invisible, just a faceless source of money, fading into the background while Alan's presence grew brighter. It wasn't just money I gave up for Jason. It was time, health, and pieces of myself I'll never get back. Vacations vanished first. For years, colleagues invited me on trips, fishing in the mountains, cruises in the Caribbean, but I always shook my head. Every spare dollar, every spare hour, had to go to Jason's dreams. My passport collected dust, while his ambitions collected my savings. I gave up comfort, too. The house grew older, the walls needed paint, the kitchen tiles cracked under my feet. I told myself repairs could wait. What mattered was Jason's next big step. So I patched leaks, tightened bolts, and ignored the aching in my knees. Retirement brochures piled higher in my desk drawer. I never opened them. What use is planning for peace when your son is still at war with the world? Then came the doctor's warnings. "Edward, your blood pressure is too high. You need to slow down. Take care of yourself." I nodded, smiled, promised I would. But prescriptions cost money, and Jason's projects always came first. I skipped doses, stretched pills longer than I should have, and told myself I was fine. A father doesn't break. A father endures. Holidays were the hardest. I remember one Christmas when Jason couldn't afford gifts for his employees. He called me in a panic, ashamed. I wired him the money that night, telling him not to worry. But when I showed up at the family dinner, he never mentioned it. He handed out gifts with Alan at his side, laughing, thanking him for making this possible. I sat quietly in the corner, clutching my coffee, invisible in my own family. Each sacrifice was small on its own. Skipping vacations, ignoring the doctor, paying bills that weren't mine, but they stacked like bricks on my shoulders until I could barely stand. And still, I gave more. I gave because I believed Jason would one day see the truth, believed he would honor the years I had carried him. But belief is fragile. And as Alan's shadow stretched longer across Jason's life, my sacrifices turned from gifts into secrets, buried beneath the noise of their ambition. I wasn't the father to be celebrated anymore. I was just the man who held the foundation while they built their castle on my back. Jason's star began to rise. After years of stumbling, he finally found momentum in a new partnership with Alan Graves. Their tech company started making headlines, small features at first, then bigger articles, then interviews where Jason smiled into cameras, talking about vision and innovation. Each time, I watched from the sidelines, waiting for my name to be spoken. It never was. The first celebration came when they closed a major contract. Jason invited friends, investors, even old professors to a private dinner. I found out about it through a neighbor who saw the pictures online. In them, Jason was raising a glass beside Alan, captioned, "To the man who made this possible." Not one photo of me. Not one word about the sacrifices that had kept Jason's dream alive long enough for Alan to step in. I told myself it was a mistake, a slip of memory in the excitement. But it happened again. At every launch party, every ribbon cutting, every press release, Alan's name was front and center. Mine was a ghost. The checks I had written, the debts I had carried, the sleepless nights I had endured, they weren't just forgotten. They were erased. The worst was an anniversary gala for the company. I arrived in a suit that barely fit anymore, hopeful for acknowledgement. Jason saw me, shook my hand politely, but quickly moved on. When he took the stage, he said, "I want to thank the man who believed in me from day one, Alan Graves." My chest tightened. I sat there, clapping with numb hands, while Alan bowed his head in false humility. I wanted to stand, to shout the truth, but I stayed silent. Not yet. Afterward, I lingered in the shadows as guests approached Jason. They praised his brilliance, admired his partnership with Alan, spoke about his bright future. No one mentioned me. I was invisible, the father erased in plain sight. On the drive home, the city lights blurred into streaks through the windshield. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles whitened, telling myself it was only temporary, that Jason would remember me one day. But deep down, I knew. The celebrations weren't temporary. They were practice. Practice for the final stage, where Alan would fully replace me, and Jason would let it happen with a smile. Of all the sacrifices I made, this one stings the most. Jason called me months before the wedding, his voice hurried, anxious. "Dad, the venue wants a deposit. Alan and I are waiting for some funds to clear. Could you help out just for now?" His words were smooth, careful, but I heard the tremor underneath. He needed me. Again. The wedding hall was no ordinary venue. It was a palace of chandeliers and marble floors, a place where power and wealth danced in plain sight. The deposit was more than most people earn in a year. I hesitated, staring at the figure on the invoice, feeling my chest tighten. But Jason was my son. How could I let him start his married life with embarrassment, with disappointment? I told myself it was the last time, the final act of a father's devotion, so I walked into the bank once more. I withdrew what little I had left, signing the forms with hands that shook from age and exhaustion. As the teller stamped the papers, I felt as though I was handing over not just money but pieces of my own soul. That night, I wired the deposit directly. Jason texted back, "Thanks, Dad. You're a lifesaver." 10 words, no call, no visit, just 10 words. I told myself it was enough, that one day, when he stood at the altar, he would remember who had made it possible. That when the master of ceremonies called for the father of the groom, I would finally hear my name spoken with pride. But the truth was far crueler. I had paid for the very stage where my erasure would be announced. My sacrifice didn't buy me honor, it bought Alan's coronation. The chandeliers I paid for lit his face, not mine. The applause thundered for him, not me. As I sat in that second row, declared dead by my own son, a single thought burned in my chest. I funded my own funeral. After the wedding, silence filled my house. The kind of silence that presses on your chest, heavier than grief. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at old bills, my heart replaying Jason's words. My real father died when I was young. Each syllable echoed like nails in a coffin. But I was not in the ground yet, and something inside me refused to stay buried. One restless night, I climbed into the attic. Dust clung to my hands as I opened the boxes stacked against the far wall. They were filled with the forgotten evidence of a lifetime. Folders of tuition payments, invoices for car repairs, contracts for loans. Each paper carried my name. Each one was proof that while Jason was building his future, I was selling mine piece by piece. At first, I only meant to look to remind myself I hadn't imagined the sacrifices. But as the night stretched on, I realized these weren't just memories. They were weapons, legal, undeniable, sharp as blades. Every document was dated, signed, stamped, not stories or claims, facts. I spread them across the attic floor like puzzle pieces. The tuition checks I had written when he was 18, the title transfer for his first car, bank statements showing withdrawals for his failed startup, loan documents signed in my handwriting, and tucked between them all, receipts for the wedding hall deposit. The very stage where he declared me dead had my name etched into its foundation. I felt anger, yes, but beneath it was clarity. Jason and Alan had painted me as obsolete, irrelevant, gone. Yet the truth was here, black ink on white paper. Without me, there would have been no college degree, no company, no wedding. Without me, there would be no Jason Sullivan standing in that spotlight at all. For the first time since the humiliation, I smiled not a smile of joy, but of recognition. They had written me out of the story. But I held the original script, and I would make sure the world read it. The attic became my war room. By day, I moved through the world like a shadow buying groceries, greeting neighbors, nodding politely as if nothing had changed. By night, I sat among the boxes, sorting, stacking, cataloging. The silence that once suffocated me now gave me focus. Each receipt I touched burned like fuel. Each signature reminded me I had not died. I had built everything they stood on. I found the tuition checks first, tucked in yellowing envelopes. Each one bore my name in careful cursive, written late at night when exhaustion blurred my eyes but love kept my hands steady. Then came the bank transfers, the exact figures that had drained my savings account into Jason's startup. I studied the numbers, remembering how I had signed away my retirement, telling myself it was an investment. Looking at them now, they weren't investments. They were chains. Then the car documents, the bill of sale, the insurance I had paid for years. Proof that Jason's first taste of freedom had been bought with my restraint. He had told his friends he scraped it together. No, I scraped myself together so he could drive. I spread the evidence across the floor until the attic looked like an archive. Tuition, car, startup, debts, wedding deposit. All of it bore one common thread, Edward Sullivan. My name, in black ink, on every line that had built Jason's life. Not Alan Graves. Not anyone else. Just me. I sat back, staring at the paper trail of my own sacrifices, and for the first time, I stopped feeling like a ghost. Ghosts leave no trace. Ghosts cannot be proven. But here, stacked in piles around me, was proof undeniable. Proof that could speak louder than Jason's lies, louder than Alan's smirk, louder than any applause in that hall. I realized then that I didn't need revenge born of rage. I didn't need fists or fury. I had something stronger evidence. Cold, clean, irrefutable. And in the right hands, evidence isn't just memory, it's judgment. I closed the boxes, labeling them carefully. Tomorrow, I would call someone who understood the weight of ink better than anyone else, a lawyer. The next morning, I carried the first box of documents into a modest office downtown. The brass letters on the door read Harper and Associates. Inside, the smell of paper and polished wood filled the air. My hands trembled as I set the box down on the lawyer's desk. Miss Harper looked at me over her glasses, patient, sharp, the kind of person who could slice through lies with a single question. "What exactly do you want me to do with this?" she asked, tapping the lid of the box. I swallowed. "I want the truth to breathe again." She raised a brow, but said nothing. Instead, she opened the box and pulled out the first folder. Tuition receipts, then the car documents, loan contracts, bank transfers. Page after page, she flipped through them, her eyes narrowing, lips tightening. The room was silent except for the steady shuffle of paper. 10 minutes passed, then 20. Finally, she leaned back in her chair and folded her arms. "Mr. Sullivan," she said slowly, "what you have here isn't just proof of financial support. This is a ledger of ownership. These aren't gifts, they're investments. Legally documented investments. Every signature, every transfer, every deposit ties Jason's successes to you. If this went to court, you wouldn't just be acknowledged. You could claim stake." Her words hit me like thunder. I hadn't thought of ownership. I wasn't seeking wealth. All I had wanted was recognition. But now, the picture was bigger. Jason and Alan hadn't just erased me, they had built their empire on my back. And by law, I still carried rights over it. Miss Harper closed the folder and looked at me firmly. "Do you want revenge, Mr. Sullivan? Or do you want justice?" For the first time, I allowed myself to imagine it, not yelling, not begging, not pleading for respect, but standing calmly while the evidence spoke for me. Proof undeniable, law unshakable. I thought of Jason's face when he called Alan his father, the smug pride in his voice. And then I imagined that pride turning to ash. "Justice," I said quietly. "The kind that leaves no room for denial." Miss Harper nodded once. "Then we'll start scanning everything, and when the time comes, Mr. Sullivan, you'll let me know how loud you want the truth to speak." Weeks passed, and with Miss Harper's help, the mountain of documents turned into a fortress. She scanned each page, organizing them into digital files, each one tagged and cross-referenced. Late at night, I would sit in her office as the scanner hummed, watching the glowing green bar crawl across each paper. It felt like watching my life be resurrected line by line. One evening, she slid a folder across the desk toward me. "These are the most valuable," she said. Inside were contracts Jason himself had signed years ago. In his own handwriting, his own signature, were acknowledgments of loans I had provided, promissory notes, agreements that he would repay me when his ventures succeeded. He had never repaid a cent. And yet, here was the undeniable truth. Jason had never built his empire alone. He had built it on borrowed ground, and the title deed was still in my hands. I ran my fingers over the ink, remembering the nights we sat at the kitchen table. Jason, full of promises, scribbling his name on the dotted line. Me, full of hope, convincing myself that this was accountability, that one day he would honor these words. But he never did. He tucked the papers away, along with his gratitude. "These aren't just debts," Miss Harper explained. "They're admissions. Every contract is proof that Jason acknowledged your role, that he knew exactly what you gave. If Alan tries to argue that you were never part of Jason's story, these will crush that lie in seconds." I nodded, silent. For the first time, I could picture the confrontation not just emotional, but factual. The cameras could capture Jason's smile, but the contracts would capture his dependence. The world might cheer for him now, but when these documents surfaced, the applause would turn to whispers. As I slid the folder back across the desk, a thought crystallized. Jason had declared me dead in front of hundreds, but his own hand had written the proof of my life over and over in black and white. And when the time came, those signatures would resurrect me in the eyes of everyone who thought I was gone. Miss Harper leaned forward. "Mr. Sullivan, this is no longer about humiliation. This is about leverage. With this, you don't just take back your name, you control the ground they're standing on." For the first time, I felt the shift of power, quiet, steady, undeniable. The father they buried alive was no longer just breathing. He was preparing to rise. It was late one evening when I found it the single slip of paper that turned my stomach cold. Miss Harper and I had been combing through the last of the boxes, scanning receipts, when I unfolded a thin, creased document. At the top, in bold letters, was the name of the wedding hall. Beneath it, the amount of the deposit. And at the bottom, my signature. Edward Sullivan. I stared at it for a long time, my fingers trembling. I remembered the day I wired that money. Jason's voice in my ear, full of urgency, asking for help. I had told myself it was just another sacrifice, one last step before he finally stood on his own. I believed that paying for the stage would buy me a place of honor on it. Instead, it had bought my erasure. Miss Harper leaned over my shoulder, scanning the paper with sharp eyes. "This," she said, tapping the receipt, "is damning. They declared you dead on a stage you paid for. This is more than evidence, it's irony, and irony leaves scars." I folded the receipt carefully, sliding it into a folder of its own. The chandeliers, the music, the applause, all of it had been built on my dime. Every guest who clapped that night had been sitting in a hall I funded. And when Jason smiled into the microphone, replacing me with Alan, the lights above his head were glowing because I had kept the power on. The humiliation cut deeper with this proof in hand, but it also sharpened my resolve. I had paid for the foundation of my own funeral, yes, but that meant I also owned it. The very stage where Jason had buried me alive would be the same stage where I would rise again. Not with shouting, not with fists, with paper, with truth. I looked at Miss Harper and whispered, "This will be the nail in their coffin." She nodded. "This will be the hammer that drives it in." By now, the evidence was stacked high, but Miss Harper urged me to dig deeper. "If you want to strike once and never have to lift your hand again," she said, "we need to show not just the past, but the present. We need to prove that even today, they're standing on your shoulders." So I went back through the files, this time pulling Jason's more recent statements, bank records, company filings, emails that had been forwarded to me over the years. The deeper I dug, the clearer it became. The company Jason and Alan bragged about was still tied to me. My loans hadn't just fueled his beginning, they were still the lifeline keeping his empire breathing. Buried in the paperwork were renewal agreements for lines of credit, all co-signed under my name. Jason had assured me, years ago, that these were temporary measures, just until cash flow stabilized. He never released me from them. That meant every investor praising him, every client trusting him, was unknowingly trusting me. If I pulled out, the ground would give way beneath his feet. I found records of recurring payments too, insurance premiums, vendor deposits, all set up through accounts linked back to me. Jason had built a fortress, but its foundation wasn't stone. It was my signature. Miss Harper tapped the stack with a measured smile. Do you see it now? They cannot declare you dead, because your name is the blood still pumping through their company. You own their heartbeat. The realization was both devastating and liberating. I had spent years believing my sacrifices were swallowed by time, forgotten in the rush of Jason's ambition. But they hadn't disappeared, they had compounded. Layer by layer, they bound him tighter to me. He couldn't erase me. He could only pretend. And when the moment came, I would show the world what he truly was. Not a self-made visionary, but a man propped up by the father he buried alive. And when I withdrew my support, it wouldn't just bruise his pride. It would collapse the very walls around him. The documents told the story. The contracts, the receipts, the bank statements, all of it formed a map of Jason's life drawn in my handwriting. But Miss Harper wanted something more. We need something the public can understand instantly, she said. Words on a page are powerful, but a picture will destroy denial before it even forms. So we began compiling a video. Miss Harper's team worked late nights, pulling bank transfer slips, matching them with dates, overlaying Jason's own emails thanking me for funds. They spliced it together with footage from his public speeches, his interviews, his proud declarations of being self-made. The contrast was damning. Jason boasting into cameras while, in the corner of the screen, the truth appeared: wire transfer from Edward Sullivan. Then came the most devastating clip of all, Jason's wedding day. The moment burned into my memory, now burned into the file. Jason smiling, saying, "My real father died when I was young. Alan raised me." The words echoed, and then, timed perfectly, the video cut to the receipt of the wedding hall deposit. My signature. My sacrifice. The stage he buried me on, revealed as my purchase. When the final edit was done, Miss Harper played it for me in her office. The room was silent except for Jason's voice and the cold mechanical chime of each receipt appearing on the screen. I watched my life's sacrifices flicker like evidence in a courtroom, undeniable, unarguable. For the first time, I didn't feel humiliated. I felt prepared. This, Miss Harper said, pausing the video on Jason's smiling face, isn't just a defense, it's an execution. The moment this plays, their story collapses. Alan can't talk his way out. Jason can't charm his way out. You won't need to raise your voice. The truth will speak loud enough. I leaned back, letting the glow of the screen wash over me. They thought they had buried me, erased me, replaced me. But I had built their world, and now I held the match that could burn it down. Not with rage, not with violence, but with proof. The father they buried alive wasn't finished. He was ready to rise, one last time, and let the truth do the cutting. Once the evidence was in order, Miss Harper and I began the next phase, not noise, not spectacle, but silence. Revenge is loud. Justice, however, moves in whispers until it strikes. I wanted the strike to land only once, so clean and final that there would be no recovery. The first step was freezing the arteries of Jason's empire. With the contracts and renewal agreements in hand, Miss Harper filed motions to halt credit lines tied to my name. Legally, I had every right. Those accounts weren't just support, they were obligations I had carried. Without my consent, Jason's access to millions could vanish overnight. I signed the documents calmly, though my hand trembled. It wasn't fear. It was weight, the weight of decades of sacrifice, finally shifting back to where it belonged. Each stroke of my pen felt like pulling bricks off my chest and laying them on Jason's shoulders. Meanwhile, Miss Harper contacted a discreet financial investigator. They traced the web of transactions, building a report that showed just how deeply Jason's company relied on me. If a single thread was cut, the entire tapestry would unravel. When the report landed on my desk, I stared at the diagrams, arrows and numbers, lines flowing from my accounts into his world. He hadn't just buried me. He had built his castle on my bones. At night, I rehearsed the confrontation in my mind. Not angry words, not accusations. Just silence, followed by evidence. Jason and Alan thrived on charm, on manipulation, on convincing others of their story. But charm dies in the face of proof, and I had proof enough to silence them forever. I knew the moment was coming. The wedding had been their theater, their stage for my erasure. I would choose my own stage. One where the audience wouldn't just hear the truth, they would see it, signed in ink, sealed in law. I closed the folder, exhaled, and whispered to the empty room, "This time, Jason, I won't bleed quietly. This time, you'll feel the cut." Power doesn't collapse in silence. It collapses when whispers turn into questions. That was Miss Harper's strategy. "We don't go straight for the stage," she said. "We let doubt spread first. Doubt is poison. Once it seeps in, it eats reputations alive." So we began leaking, not recklessly surgically. Anonymous packets of information sent to investors, journalists, and industry insiders. Each packet contained just enough: a promissory note here, a wire transfer there, a copy of a contract Jason had signed. No accusations, no claims, just evidence, raw and cold. At first, silence followed. But then the murmurs began. A blog post questioning Jason's self-made narrative. A financial column hinting that Alan's mentorship might not have been the only support behind the company. Investors started asking quiet questions in boardrooms. Who really funded this? How deep is their debt? The poison was spreading. Jason called me once during this storm, though I let it go to voicemail. His voice was tight, rehearsed, but I could hear the panic beneath. "Dad, if anyone contacts you about the company, don't say anything, okay? It's just competitors trying to drag us down." Competitors. That was his excuse. He never imagined the enemy was the man he'd buried alive. Meanwhile, Alan doubled down, giving interviews where he painted himself as Jason's savior. But every time his words hit the air, another piece of paper surfaced online, contradicting him: a receipt with my name, a contract with Jason's signature. Their story was unraveling stitch by stitch. I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to confront them yet. All I had to do was watch as their allies shifted uncomfortably in their seats, as their investors tightened their grip on wallets, as journalists sharpened their pens. Doubt was doing my work for me, and with every whisper, I felt lighter. For years, I had carried the weight of silence. Now, it was their turn to carry it, the silence of allies who no longer trusted them, the silence of investors pulling out, the silence of a world that was beginning to question the very foundation they stood on. The truth was moving, and once truth starts moving, it doesn't stop until it crushes everything in its path. Whispers are dangerous because they don't stop at ears, they spread to wallets, to contracts, to loyalty. Within weeks of the first leaks, Jason and Alan began to feel the sting of abandonment. A major investor withdrew from their latest round of funding, citing internal inconsistencies. Another postponed a partnership deal, demanding an audit. Vendors who once delivered on credit began insisting on payment up front, and in the business world, that kind of hesitation is a death sentence. Reputation isn't just about applause, it's about trust, and theirs was unraveling. I watched from a distance as Jason scrambled. He gave speeches to rally confidence, his smile wider than ever, his tone desperate beneath the surface. Alan worked the phones, his voice dripping charm, trying to hold the walls together, but the cracks were visible to everyone now. Whispers had become suspicion. Suspicion had become hesitation. Hesitation had become retreat. Even their allies in the press started to turn. Articles appeared questioning the timeline of their success, pointing out holes in their narrative. Self-made, once their proudest banner, began to sound like a punchline. Alan pushed back, calling it smear campaigns. Jason doubled down, swearing he had built everything with his own hands. But the world had already started looking for the receipts, and I held them all. Miss Harper updated me daily. Each time, her voice was calm, almost clinical. Another investor gone, another contract paused. "They're bleeding, Mr. Sullivan, and they don't even know where the cuts are coming from." At night, I thought about all the times Jason had left me behind, the times he chose Alan over me, the nights I stayed up counting pennies to cover his debts. And now, for the first time, he was the one losing sleep. He was the one left in the dark, wondering why the ground beneath him was crumbling. I didn't have to raise my voice. I didn't have to step into the spotlight. The world was turning on them, one ally at a time, and Jason was finally learning the lesson he had forced on me. Silence can be the loudest sound of all. Jason and Alan planned another public event, a company milestone celebration meant to distract from the chaos. They rented a hotel ballroom, invited press, pitched it as a celebration of vision and resilience. I saw the invitation come through in a forwarded email. "Should we go public then?" Miss Harper asked. "No," I replied. "We'll go personal. I requested a live stream link. They always streamed their events. That was their mistake, believing visibility was always power. We timed it down to the minute. My team loaded the video, the one with the receipts, the transfers, the wedding day clip into a secure link. Miss Harper ensured legal clearance, and I prepared just one line to accompany it. The ballroom filled with applause as Jason took the mic, his hair slicked back, his smile just as polished. Alan stood behind him, hand on his shoulder, basking in the spotlight. The crowd roared. Then, at the exact second Jason began his speech, our video launched. Emails went out. Group chats lit up. Twitter, LinkedIn, private Slack circles. The headline was simple. The father they buried alive sends his regards. The video auto-played. It showed Jason's wedding, then cuts of his speeches, his self-made lies, overlaid with proof wire transfers, receipts, legal documents. And finally Jason's voice at the wedding, "My real father died when I was young," followed by my signature on the wedding hall deposit. Within minutes, the live stream comment section froze, then exploded. Viewers stopped clapping. Journalists in the room checked their phones. Jason faltered mid-sentence. Alan whispered something behind him. But it was too late. I hadn't even left my home. I didn't have to raise my voice. I had simply sent the truth. One cold line closed the video. "This isn't revenge. This is an audit." After the video, there was no recovery. Within 24 hours, 2 major investors issued statements withdrawing support from Jason's company. News outlets picked up the story, spinning headlines like "Startup Prodigy, Built on Father's Wallet." Articles exposed the financial web, linking my name to Jason's every achievement. The board held an emergency meeting. Miss Harper forwarded me notes from a contact inside. It was chaos. Half of them wanted Jason to step down. The other half wanted to sue Alan. No one wanted to go down with them. Alan released a hasty statement that afternoon, blaming a legacy misunderstanding and emotional miscommunication. He tried to paint himself as a father figure helping a lost boy. But the internet wasn't buying it. Clips of Jason declaring me dead circulated like wildfire. The receipt overlays, the timeline, the facts, it all lined up too perfectly. Their silence once their tool was now a noose. Jason tried calling again. This time, I answered. "Dad, please, you've made your point. We can fix this together. Just pull the video." Say it was exaggerated. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I said, "Fix what? The truth?" He stammered. "I didn't think it'd go this far." I paused, then delivered it like a verdict. It didn't go far enough. Then I hung up. That night, news broke that Jason had been removed as CEO. Alan's name was scrubbed from the company website. A new interim team was announced, quiet, distant from the scandal. Miss Harper called, calm as always. "It's done," quietly, legally, completely. I walked to my kitchen, poured a glass of water, and sat in the silence. For once, it didn't ache. It soothed. It took everything in me to return to that wedding hall. A month had passed since the scandal. The building stood the same arched ceilings, golden chandeliers, marble floors, but the memory of betrayal still echoed against the walls. Miss Harper met me at the steps. "Ready?" she asked. "I paid for it," I said. "Might as well walk through it on my own terms." We walked past the entrance, where once I sat in the second row while my son told the world I was dead. Now, I walked through the center aisle, my footsteps alone. We weren't here for sentiment. We were here for final paperwork. Turns out, Jason had failed to finalize payment for the full rental. The hall still carried an outstanding balance, one he expected the company to cover. But the company, now under new management, had no intention of honoring debts that weren't disclosed properly. So the burden fell back to me. Miss Harper looked at me. "You could pay and own this space outright. They'll settle for pennies now, just to close the books." I walked to the very spot where Jason had stood and told the world I was dead. "I don't want to own this," I said. "I want to close it." That night, I signed the final check. Not to claim the hall, to shut it down. The space would be cleared, repurposed, renamed. No more weddings, no more speeches, no more memories. Just silence. A silence I now chose. The same space they used to erase me was now erased itself. It didn't bring joy. It brought something better. Closure. The last piece wasn't legal. It wasn't financial. It was personal. A letter. I wrote it the old way. Pen, paper, no edits. Just truth. "Jason, you were never meant to owe me. You were meant to remember me. I gave you everything I had not because I expected applause, but because that's what fathers do. We build, we sacrifice, we step back. But you didn't just forget me. You rewrote me. You chose another man to wear my face, to take credit for what my broken back provided. You didn't bury a stranger. You buried the man who signed every check that made you who you are. This letter isn't revenge. It's not forgiveness either. It's a record. So when you walk into rooms and wonder why the applause is softer, why the smiles don't linger, why the deals fall through, remember this letter. Not because I want you to hurt, but because I want you to never forget again. Your father, Edward Sullivan. I sealed the envelope. No return address. Miss Harper asked if I wanted confirmation of delivery. No, I said. Let him open it on his own time. Let the words stay in the room longer than I ever did. And with that, my part was done. The takedown wasn't loud. It was surgical. It was moral. It was final. And it started with a lie at a wedding and ended with the truth in an envelope. There was no stage left. The ballroom? Closed. The company? Restructured. The wedding photos? Tarnished. All that remained was a quiet cafe, neutral ground. One final request from Miss Harper. Alan Graves wants to meet. I said nothing at first. Then I nodded. Not for conversation, for confirmation. He sat across from me in a tailored suit, his tie a little too tight, his eyes a little too tired. The charm was cracked, the smile thinner. You didn't have to destroy everything, he said, voice low. We could have worked this out. I stirred my coffee. You're not the one I raised. You're the one I removed. He shifted. Jason, he was just trying to impress people, to look strong. It wasn't personal. I looked up. You taught him that shame was strength. You made erasure seem necessary. That's personal. Alan's mask slipped for a second. Just long enough. He leaned in, quieter now. You've ruined him. He's lost everything. That churns. Two have the cans. The just take a bing this is all. I finished my coffee. He never lost me. He threw me away. And what you built on my grave was never going to last. Alan opened his mouth to speak, but I stood. Don't worry, I said. I'm not pressing charges. I'm not chasing blood. I placed a folded copy of the final audit report on the table, my name on every page. The truth, sealed and stamped. This is the only thing I'll leave behind. Alan stayed seated. His hands didn't reach for the paper. I left the cafe in silence. There were no cameras this time, no applause, no final blow. Just the quiet echo of a man who thought he could replace a father and learned he was never one to begin with. The house didn't change. Same porch swing, same creaky step, same mailbox I used to stuff with Jason's tuition bills, marked paid, but it felt different now. For the first time in years, I walked through that front door without checking my phone, without worrying what Jason needed, what fires I had to put out. The only thing waiting for me was quiet. I stood in the living room, touched the frame of the photo I'd taken down years ago, Jason's high school graduation, my arm around him, his smile real, mine proud. I didn't put it back up. Some people think closure means going back, but sometimes it means keeping the past exactly where it belongs on the shelf, untouched. Miss Harper mailed me the last folder. Inside, a summary of the company's restructuring, my financial statements, proof of asset recovery. Everything had been returned to its rightful owner. No lawsuits, no threats, just order. And silence. The kind I had once feared now felt like peace. I didn't hear from Jason again. I didn't expect to. That was the cost of truth. It doesn't bring people back, but it clears the space they once filled with lies. I made tea. Saturday by the window. Let the sun fall across the floor. And for the first time in a long, long time, I didn't feel erased. I felt real. I felt whole. It started at the pharmacy. Mr. Graves? The clerk asked, glancing at the screen. I didn't flinch. I smiled. That's not me. She blinked. Sorry? I tapped the counter gently. Try Sullivan. Edward Sullivan. She corrected the name, the receipt printed, and just like that, I was visible again. It happened more than once. People asking if I was Jason's father, if I had something to do with the company, if I was the man from that video. And each time, I answered calmly, I'm Edward Sullivan. That's all you need to know. There was power in that, not in what I'd exposed, but in what I'd reclaimed. My name, my story, my breath, no longer shadowed by someone else's success or shame. I walked into the bank where I'd once worked and closed the old savings account Jason had forgotten existed. The teller looked up, surprised. "You had enough in here to help someone start a business," she joked. "I did," I said. "And now? It's time to help myself." I booked a trip. A simple one. No resorts. Just a cabin in the woods, a trail I hadn't walked in years, a camera I hadn't used since Jason's childhood. I left the phone in a drawer. No pings, no calls. I breathed in the pine air. I heard my own footsteps on old dirt, and when I returned, I framed one photo. Not of Jason, not of revenge, just a sunrise. Because sometimes survival isn't loud. It's quiet. And sometimes reclaiming your name is the loudest thing you'll ever do. I thought the video would follow me forever. But weeks passed. Strangers stopped recognizing me. The story faded beneath newer scandals, younger names, louder betrayals. The headlines moved on. So did the world. But I didn't need headlines. I had peace. At the grocery store, I stood behind a father buying snacks for his kids. I watched him count change, then whisper, "We'll come back for the cookies next week." I reached over, quiet. "Add the cookies," I said. He looked startled. "I can't let you." "You're not letting me. I'm doing it." He smiled, nodded once. The kids beamed. No one needed to know who I was. No one needed to know what I'd done. I sat on park benches. I wrote letters I'd never send. I smiled at dogs. I baked for neighbors. I lived. Miss Harper checked in once a month. Always brief, always professional. Accounts are steady. No movement from Jason or Alan. All clean. "Good," I said. "Let it stay that way." She paused once, before hanging up. "You did what most men dream about," she said. "You answered disrespect with restraint. And you won. But it didn't feel like winning. It felt like breathing. One long, quiet breath that no one could take from me. And maybe that was enough. It hit me during dinner. The chair across from mine. Empty. It had been empty for a while. But that night, it felt loud, like silence with a face. I used to imagine Jason sitting there, telling me about work, about his next big pitch. I used to imagine grandkids climbing into that seat, asking me why my eyebrows were so bushy. Now, I just ate in silence. I didn't feel bitter, but I felt the gap. The cost of dignity is distance. The price of truth is loneliness. I could have lied. I could have played along, smiled through the ceremony, clapped for Alan, kept my place in Jason's fiction. But what kind of father would that have made me? What kind of man? I cleared the table, washed the dishes, and I left that chair exactly where it was empty. Not as a monument to grief, but as proof that I made room, even when they didn't. Some nights, I'd talk to that chair, not out loud, just in my mind. And some nights, it talked back, not with apologies, not with regret, but with silence. And somehow, I learned to accept that, because sometimes the apology never comes. Sometimes the people we raised choose not to come home, and we survive anyway. There's a bench by the lake a few blocks from my house. It faces east. When Jason was little, we'd sit there before school. He'd ask why the water glowed orange some mornings and gray on others. I'd tell him, "That's the sky deciding how honest it wants to be today." I hadn't been back in years. But something pulled me there one morning. I brought my thermos. Saturday, in the same spot. The same slanted wood. A little more worn. Like me. A teenager jogged by, earbuds in, barely noticed me. A couple walked past with their dog. Life moved. Not around me, through me. And then I saw something strange. A folded paper, tucked under the bench slat. Not old, not soggy, just left there, carefully. I unfolded it. No signature. Just a line. "You were always more sunrise than shadow. I just didn't know how to look up." It wasn't proof. It wasn't confirmation. It wasn't even clear if it was for me. But I let myself believe for one soft breath that maybe Jason wrote it. That maybe, in some quiet moment, he sat here too. He remembered. He regretted. Not enough to undo what was done, but enough to whisper back through time. I didn't take the note. I left it there for the bench, for the lake, for whoever needed to read it next. Then I stood. And for the first time since that chandelier-lit betrayal, I looked east and smiled. Months passed. No updates, no letters, no knock at the door. Just silence. And while the world spins fast for most, mine had slowed to something simple. I read more, walked longer, listened to music I once found too sad. One evening, I passed by a bookstore. The window display had a poster of Jason clean-cut, sharp-suited, standing beside his co-author, a memoir. The title, Built from Nothing. I walked in, picked up a copy, and read the dedication. To those who believed in me, and to those who didn't. Not a word about me, not a single name. But I didn't buy the book. I didn't flip the table. I just walked out. Because I finally understood, silence isn't always absence. Sometimes, it's survival. Jason could tell the world any story he liked, but I had the truth. And unlike him, I didn't need to sell it. That night, I returned to my porch, tea in hand, silence beside me, and for once, it didn't feel like something missing. It felt earned, because when people try to erase you, they expect you to vanish. But when you stay quiet and still stay standing, that's something they'll never forget, even if they never say it out loud. There's something people don't tell you about being erased. You stop speaking, not because you can't, but because no one listens. That's what made my revenge so quiet. Not rage, not noise, just the truth, spoken to myself until it echoed. Now, there's nothing left to expose. No debts to pay, no applause to chase, just mornings. And the man I see in the mirror, he's older, he's thinner, he's grayer, but he's not broken, he's not erased. Sometimes I wonder if Jason will come back not with apologies, but just to sit, to listen, to be still. But I don't wait. I don't keep the door unlocked. I don't rehearse forgiveness. Because this story didn't end in reconciliation. It ended in recognition. Of who I was. Of what I gave. Of what I refused to lose. There's no gravestone with my name on it. No legacy buried beneath someone else's lie. I am here. Still standing. And if you remember anything from this story, let it be this. You don't need to burn the house down to prove it was yours. You just need to walk out head high and never look back. Edward Sullivan lived. Edward Sullivan was not erased. And that is the last word